This is Extracted with your hosts, George Nguyen and Alex Thymmons.
Definitely, there was a lot to think about over the past few days.
It pisses me off with everything that's happening. Their justification for the war was, oh, we're doing it for the Iranian people. We're just going to drop the bombs and then we're going to wait for you to save the day. This is the worst planning I've ever seen with regards to a campaign, like a war campaign. You're supposed to have a long-term strategic plan. There's no plan. We're going to drop bombs and hope for the best. And that's like pretty sad to just watch.
Yeah. And I think that's probably because I think in their mind was that they were able to have assets in the country, right, to foment some of the riots that happened in the earlier part of this year. And that got squashed. So maybe they thought, well, if we just drop some bombs and do the decapitation strategy, that an organic uprising will happen, right?
The strategy is wrong because every time you have that, I mean, look at history, right? Historically. So in reality, you're not helping a resistance by bombing the central government. You're actually aiding the government to you strengthening it. Good luck with that. They're thinking it's going to fall from the sky. And I think that's just worst planning I've seen in a while, actually. For lack thereof, I would hope that there was some planning, but I think it was done by basically amateurs.
Yep. Well, he's surrounded by people who probably don't have the credentials.
Oh, I know. I've been there. I've interacted with some of them. It's his buddies who bring their people that they like on board that have zero experience or very minimal experience. What do you think about the murder or the killing of the leadership? Like, what's your view on that?
Well, it's funny because it happened on the first day of Ramadan, right? The first thing I thought about was the Viet Cong and the Tet Offensive, right? And because I was like, well, this is weird. It's like a major celebration, right? But I heard some analysts too reflect on this, and they're like, that's probably the worst timing because one, it's a spiritual holiday, and two, the whole Shia ethos, right, is martyrdom. You made a martyr out of someone who already had prostate cancer, right, who was probably going to die relatively soon. So making him a martyr probably wasn't a good idea. And I think to your point earlier, right, is that I think it served the political class, right, within Iran, using that martyrdom as a way to galvanize their control. And you see that in full display, right, even today, yesterday, when they were parading his body around, right? And even today, with the burial of those 100 plus people from Manab, right? I think the timing was really bad, and the fact that there is no real plan, it's crazy to me.
I think you've hit a note I think should be highlighted here, right? So they did this during Ramadan. So that's when I deployed to Afghanistan or deployed to Iraq, but especially in Afghanistan, I worked very closely with a lot of imams. So there was always a lot in these campaigns, you have religious advisors in this case, right? These imams or religious Islamic scholars who can provide some insight on timing of a particular operation.
Yep.
What we have here is it's obvious that they haven't used any. They haven't taken into consideration the history of Islam and the teachings and the repercussions of actually attacking during Ramadan. Whose advice did they take? Israel's, right? So this is very much an Israel-planned operation. So it's almost done deliberately. It was predictable, especially given the fact that it's Ramadan and that you went ahead and you killed a religious scholar during Ramadan. You made him a martyr.
Yep. And I thought it was also interesting that the refinery, right, in Saudi Arabia was bombed, and Iran came out with, we were in touch with our Saudi brothers to let them know that it wasn't us. And then what was interesting, right, was the arrest of the Mossad agents in Saudi Arabia, right?
I think definitely Israel is hoping that Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the other Sunni majority countries would go ahead and join this effort. And definitely an attempt to get Saudi Arabia into the conflict. They're trying to make this a Sunni Shia conflict as opposed to an Islam Judaism conflict.
Definitely feels like it.
Very naive in thinking. If that's indeed the strategy that they're following, then I think that's very naive of them to think. And I think it's going to have repercussions that have not been considered. What do you think about the timing, though? Why now? Why not pursue peace?
Well, I think it's because they know with all the things around the Epstein file, right? I think Republicans know that they're likely going to lose in the midterms and probably the general. So they have to speed run through it, right? I think that's because how often does a candidate like Trump comes into power, right? Not very often. And so I think they're just speed running through this because they're like, this is probably our only chance. So they're doing it.
I think that's about right. I think Israel is afraid that come November, you're going to have a completely different restructuring of Congress, which traditionally during the midterms, the party that does not have the White House typically wins Congress. So during the midterms. So in this case, I think they're afraid that the impact will be much worse than historically in the past. And they have lost a lot of support on the Democratic side, Israel in particular. And it's interesting because you do still see AIPAC being very involved right now in getting the Democrats that are in Congress and that have been put there basically and supported by AIPAC during their elections that are right now basically stopping the Democratic Party from trying to move forward any efforts that would stop the president from having this war with Iran. So what do you think about, any thoughts about AIPAC and how it runs?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. There was already rumors, right, of Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer, right, been trying to convince the Democrats to hold off on the vote, right, on the war power stuff. And I think you're absolutely right that they probably know that they can't be too explicit with how they're kowtowing to AIPAC. So the best they could do is hold off on voting for things, right? So that it gives Trump the room he needs to take action, right? Because you look at what happened when W. Bush invaded Iraq, there was a vote, and all those who voted for the invasion, they got kicked out, right? What came elections time. So I think the Democratic Party probably observed that and say, maybe it's not good for us to force a vote or even to. So the best thing we could do is just hold off on pushing this bill through that would curtail the president's ability to wage war.
It's pretty sickening to see a lot of the Democrats basically aligning with supporting this war.
Yeah, well, I think it's obvious that our elected officials, right, a lot of them are funded and supported by AIPAC and it's all of its affiliates, right? So it's definitely not surprising that they would take actions to make sure that Israel's interests comes ahead of American interests, right? Look at all the things that we can do right now. You look at affordability in America, childcare, funding cuts to education. All these things need our attention and our money, right? But instead of focusing and creating new money to support these programs and making America truly stronger, right? And rebuilding the middle class, that's the big problem here, right? They will find a way to find, endless money for a foreign country because they're all funded by him. That's the truth, and everyone sees it.
So he's aligned with these very rich interests, and I'm pressing something on the chair that is putting down. There you go.
All of a sudden it gets shorter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was really hoping, I had some hopes that some positive things would happen, and I've seen it quite the opposite, where right now you have the destruction of the middle class. And when you have young people, youth, they find it normal to sleep in their cars while they work early on. It's like, oh, do I need to save enough money? Or to have this gig economy where most of the folks graduating high school of the past 5 years, right? So since COVID, basically, they are operating in a gig economy, except maybe if they join the military or with a few exceptions, maybe when they went to college. But the majority are gambling is a big issue among the youth right now. It's really the goal for the future is maybe I win the lottery. That's
we talked about this before, right? It's this exploitative nature of capitalism, right? And what we're seeing now is hyper exploitation. You look at some of the richest people in the world. How are they getting rich? It's not on producing anything really, right? What they're producing is information on people. And apparently there's value to that. But I'm not sure if there's real value to it when you look at the fact that that new study that came out, right? When it's trained on its own AI generated content, the model breaks down, right? That shows us that even with this exploitative model of capitalism, it can't survive without human engagement and interaction, right? So that goes to show you that there is a value to human lives. So if we're saying that there's value to human lives, right, then shouldn't we spend more of our time as a capitalist society, right, to invest in the very source, right? Just like we invest in oil fields, right, so we can extract oil out of it. These are data fields, right? Humans, shouldn't we be investing in them, right? If we really want to get more out of them, right? Turning everyone poor and homeless is probably not going to produce the best content, right, or best engagement that's going to feed these algorithms, right? These large language models.
What can we do with all these young people that don't have a perspective or prospects for the future? Get them in the military and send them to war.
Yep. Wow.
And that's a little bit scary. It is, right?
But it's funny because you mentioned that, because I ran across today some quote unquote thirst traps, right, of people in the military or people wearing military fatigue, right? These are talking about how the military paid for their house and all that stuff. And this is like such obvious propaganda, right? Of getting young people excited about joining the army because the military can offer all these benefits. But we're not talking about the effects.
Were they in rural Alabama or were they in San Francisco? Because I'm pretty sure the military would not put an apartment in San Francisco.
Exactly.
It's maybe they're stationed in San Francisco, but they have a family. Maybe, probably not even in California. I don't even know how many houses are being built by the GA Bill in California. Yeah. So it's like, I was like, we paid for your cubicle home.
Here's a tent
200 miles away from any city center.
Exactly.
So you can, yes, we will pay for you to have a farmhouse.
Exactly.
You still have to pay for the loan, so it's not free, right?
Exactly.
But this is our way to get people in the rural areas.
But it's crazy. I think your comment about that, the whole sending the youth to die because there's no use for them at home, because what that's saying, right? Idle hand is the playground of the devil, right? When kids are unemployed and have no prospect, right? And this is why a lot of people aren't married and choose not to have kids, right? They get married because they just don't see the issue with affordability going away, right? And so we talk about millennials being disadvantaged, but then we look at Gen Z. Man, I can't even imagine that being a Gen Z and what their future looks like.
Well, it's funny. So when I work with Congress and when I work closely with the White House too, everybody was using AI to generate laws in Congress. And at the White House, if you look at the executive orders, it's so bluntly obvious that these were ChatGPT generated. So I'm sure, I can imagine somebody there at the White House going on ChatGPT, maybe ChatGPT Pro, so they have like a better answer. If no, it's still slow.
Yeah,
it's like, it's only 27 minutes to get an answer. So, what do we do with all these youth? And then execute, and then ChatGPT goes, you could send them all to war. So there you go. Your unemployment issue among the youth.
Yeah, evaporates. Wow, that's so dystopian.
I no longer put it past this. I've seen enough. I'm more than 50% leaning towards that's probably what's happening.
Well, also, it's funny because you said that, because there's a study that we recently released, right, where it showed that when you ask for advice from these AI models on what to do, 98% of the time, they prefer to kill as much as they can or go nuclear, right? So that's always their end game, right? Is always to win at all costs. or because, well, I mean, it's a large language model, right? So they're always given to optimize on something, right? So they're optimizing on, well, how do you solve unemployment, but also solve for a potential dissent, right? Well, you just turn those consumers into part of your products, right? Which is part of the military industrial complex, right? Instead of weapons, you have humans that are going there and just going through the meat grinder, right?
The AI will mold itself based on the user.
Yep.
And when the user is a white supremacist, you get some interesting results out of that.
Yep. It's funny because like a video I saw was actually of a black influencer in military fatigue showing off her home that she bought with help from the military. So and that was the same thing that happened, right, during the Vietnam War, right, when they were drafting people because they couldn't get the white kids to join. So they recruited black communities. And that was funny.
You're in San Francisco. So how do you see this separation between, right? So there's especially when it comes to the ethics on how AI is being used.
Well, I think some of especially in San Francisco, I think we're very hyper aware of the need for surveillance, right? Especially in public spaces, to not cross the personal space threshold, right? So even in San Francisco, we have thousands and thousands of cameras, right, on the streets that monitors everyday activities. And so we use AI, right, to identify people and events that happen, right? But that doesn't necessarily cross over to, I think, where Palantir and a lot of these other AI companies are trying to merge all these data points together, right? Creating a more complete profile, right, of your life events, which I think that's the scary part, right? It's like once they're able to connect the fact that it's George who walked on the street, and then George came home at this time because the Ring camera saw him, right? And his phone identified him being in this location with these coordinates. So he's at home. And then he walked in and the lights turned on, right? He activated Google, right, to play music. And we know that at this time he likes to play this kind of music to relax in the evening, right? But it has all this. That's where I think it crosses the line. When one aspect of it, use it to ensure public safety, right, is one thing. But once that public safety moves into personal space, and this is where the government is going, right? With the app, we saw that during the ICE raids, right, in Minneapolis. The Palantir created an app that allowed all the ICE agents to not just know the movements of people in a neighborhood, right, but also see the prediction of what they're likely to do next, right, where they're likely to be next. That's the scary part. That's the part that shouldn't be happening. That's truly Big Brother there.
So there's a lot of Israeli tools that have been used also by ICE.
Yep.
They have contracts and agreements on using some of these where, right, so when your cell hits a tower, being able to see all these movements. And now, I think we've been doing this for a long time, though. This is not new, right?
Yep.
What's new, however, it's sure we've had these abilities to surveil, but a lot of it has been a big terrorist attack happens. Now you can use all of these different tools to go back and find out, right, who are all the people responsible. And well, we're getting to the point where, right, so there were very strict rules. Mm-hmm. Can you access anytime you want? You have to have a very good reason to be able to access this data. So there were these abilities to centralize data. FBI has certain task forces that do that. But there is always an attorney present saying you cannot do that. You are breaking the Constitution if you do this. And this is what you need to be doing. And we have strict rules about that. The problem is now you have a different entity like ICE that does not have those constraints and does not have those attorneys that go behind them and say, no, you cannot do this. And that's when things become very concerning. This is why they've been having all this money going to ICE as opposed to other law enforcement agencies, because ICE doesn't have these restrictions as tight as, say, for example, the FBI, where they wouldn't be able to actually go ahead and build these surveillance capabilities and use them however they see fit.
Yep.
You cannot do that, not in
Yep.
our country.
Yep.
We have very strict rules about that.
Yep. And it's crazy to me, right? That we have a set of rules for one agency and a whole set of other rules for another agency. It should be uniform, right? Across
Because that agency was not meant to.
But what I'm saying is it doesn't matter if you're newly created or whatever. The moment you are created, all the laws that ties the hands of all the other agencies ties your hands too. You don't get a special permission.
Well, there's ways that it's not, they're still trying to follow the law, but there's all these loopholes, right? So they can surveil it themselves, but if a private company comes in and the private company does the surveillance for them, and then they access the data, but basically they sell the data to the US government. Then it's like, well, the US government is saying, well, we didn't do any surveillance. We purchased data from a private company, but they are enabling a private company to actually do the surveillance for them. So it's just a way to circumvent regulation as opposed to we didn't do it in the government. ICE didn't do it. ICE purchased this data from an Israeli company or from Palantir or from whatever other companies involved.
I think this goes back to need for stricter regulations, right? On what can be done and what can't be done. And I think it starts with, we talk about the extractive model of capitalism, right? Where data is being harvested from people with zero penalty, zero cost, and it's being sold and bought open markets. And even though the people, the data being sold on individuals, these people didn't consent to that. And I'm sure they're like, oh, well, they did consent because they assigned the terms of service agreements, right? But we need to have some sort of transparency law, right? Where, cool, if you want to track people's activities 24/7 or whatever at all, period, right? You have to make it very clear. And it has to be separate from the terms of services, right? It has to go on. Do you allow this company to do these things, X, Y, and Z? Make it super clear to people, not buried in legalese, right? And then two, if you are tracking that person and that person agrees to it, then you as the company have the responsibility, right, to ensure that if a hacking event happens, you have to be able to go back to that person and say, I'm sorry, and this is the damage that was caused to you. We have to pay that damage to you, right? It's about that accountability again, right? And that provenance that we talked about. I think that's one way to address this problem that we have right now, right? Of wholesale aggregation of data across every single platform there is out there.
I mean, I think it's a bit, it's done now. So it's almost impossible to go back to these companies and say, now you have to pay everybody whose data you've used, right? And you see a lot of these open source platforms that they've used to build their AI. Now they're going to actually close down and shut down those open source platforms because they want to have a monopoly on knowledge. And when you have an entity that's trying to have a monopoly on knowledge, it's unethical. We can go into this more in detail in the future. But what else on Iran so that we're not going too far off the rabbit hole?
Well, the timing, go back to timing again. I thought it was interesting that we, quote unquote, secure the oil supply chain in Venezuela and then go on to shut down the supply chain that's going through the Strait of Hormuz, right?
For the rest of the world.
Well, for them, it's not really the rest of the world. For them, they don't really care, right? But I thought the timing of both events quite interesting.
You're bringing a very valid point. Where does the majority of this oil that is going through the Strait of Hormuz go?
It's China, India,
and Europe.
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We should look into this for the next sessions and talk a little bit about where is being affected most by this war.
Yep. The impact is beyond Iran and the Middle East. It's global.
So the impact is definitely global, and I'm surprised we're not seeing it right now at the pump here in America, but I think it's intentional.
Yep.
Because they don't want to upset Grandpa Trump. So Papa Trump, I don't know, what should we call him? I was talking to a friend today, and he called him the American Ayatollah. I like that. So
Although he doesn't really have a theology that he subscribes to, right?
Well, white supremacy has got its
Yes.
own thing. So give him some white robes and he'll be right up there. So I may cut this one out.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Oh my god. It's crazy. I thought it was interesting your comment about how the proverbial the cat's out of the bag, right? Where if these companies already have access to all the data, how do we enforce this kind of mutualist model, right? Is it dead in the water already? How do we create that kind of provenance to ensure that people are compensated for transgressions that happen?
I think it's not the way I look at it. I look at it looking forward, right?
Mhm.
So, how do you make sure that it's not the compensation that is important because money can be devalued very fast? So we can give everybody 2 cents and then
Yep.
it's like it's not going to do anything. You can give
Yep.
everybody $100 and then devalue the dollar so it's the
Yep.
equivalent of a dollar. But I think it's more about ownership.
Mhm.
So actually have ownership of this AI platform,
Mm.
right? So it was built with your intellectual property in a sense, right?
Mhm.
With your own,
Yep.
and therefore you should have a stake in that AI platform.
Mm.
So having basically society having a stake in these platforms as opposed to being owned by just one person who went out there and stole this data. And now it's monetizing on this data and it's telling everybody that you stole this data from me. And now you're telling me I have to subscribe to your platform to use data you stole from me.
But how you probably have to pass legislations that forces these companies to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if it's going to be done, it's two ways to do it, right? So there's legislation or there's violence, and we prefer legislation. So,
Yep.
and because if you don't do it through legislation, right, so you're going to have this pressure being built, and then eventually that pressure will result into other effects that we do not want to see. So, how do you avoid this violence from happening in the future, right? Which is at this rate, this is the direction we're heading towards. And the way that we do that is through legislation. So, can we convince our lawmakers, or can we have people in Congress that can start looking at pieces of legislation that is looking at as capitalism fails, or as capitalism, or as the capitalist precepts are failing? What are we replacing them with, right? So, and there's nothing and nobody out there that's actually doing this. There's kind of, well, we've been fine in the past, so we're going to be fine in the future. I don't think so. I think you need to start seriously looking into. You've got a lot of people being disenfranchised, especially the youth, and it's only a matter of time until these disenfranchised entities start causing problems. And it's better be proactive than reactive. So, or it's like that's not the answer. So,
yeah, I guess this is why we founded the group, right? It's to advance these kinds of policies because it needs to be done. Where we're at right now, where 1% of American control half of the wealth in the country, like that's scary. 1% controls half of the wealth. What that leaves the rest. I mean, we joked about earlier, right? About the army pushing out videos, right? And you're laughing about, is this in Alabama or is this in San Francisco, right? It's true, right? Yeah.
Not to have him in Alabama's a beautiful state. It's not, but you go out in the rural areas outside of the big cities where housing is a lot cheaper. And yes, you can now qualify for a VA loan. But it's a little bit harder to qualify for a VA loan in a place like San Francisco. Today, maybe 9 years ago, you probably could still qualify, but today it's
not anymore.
Incredibly hard. They're not. The government is not going to be like, we're going to support your $700,000 house or apartment in San Francisco.
If you can even find it.
So, yeah.
Crazy. I think this goes back to seeing where unaffordability is the big issue here, right? And I think all these alternatives that people are pushing forward with UBI and stuff like that, I'm like, no, that's like pittance. Giving people $1,000 so they don't revolt. It's like, I
I'll
don't think
give you
that's going to work.
$1,000 so you can give me the $1,000 back for the subscription
Exactly.
that you pay. While you sleep in the car, you can move in with me, sleeping in the
Exactly.
Tesla. So it's like, there you go.
Yep. This is why I think the concept of like ownership needs to happen, or else if we're not going to do it legally, the youth are gonna do it violently.
Well, there's another way to use their violence. Hey, we got a new Ayatollah.
Exactly, right?
I'm not talking about the American one. I'm talking about the Iranian one, just
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm not being accused of insurrection on the.
Exactly.
So I think another thing that we haven't talked about. So we're talking about Ramadan, right? So first day of the bombing, right? Yes, you have the Ayatollah and the leadership being killed, but you also have 168 schoolgirls
Martyred.
being killed.
Yep.
So during Ramadan. So it's just tragic what people are going through right now. And a lot of them are hoping that this is going to end up in something positive. So my heart is with them, and I know your heart is with them. And what can we do to help the people of Iran so that, because at the end of the day, we're all responsible for it, right? As Americans, right? So America is being involved in this tragic murder, basically, and it's involved in an illegal war that is bringing a lot of human life to an end in the Middle East. And for that, we all hold a little bit of responsibility as Americans. So we do have a responsibility to react and make sure that this illegal war is stopped.
Yep. Well, we talk about the Iraq war, right? 1 million Iraqis dead, right? With the invasion. And Iran is much bigger than Iraq. What's the death toll going to be, right? In Iran this time, right? If we're talking about putting boots on the ground, right? And how many lives, American lives, will be sacrificed too. And I think what all of us can do now is to ensure that the right information gets passed and that we call out fake news, right? And bad information. I think there is a lot of propaganda out there that's going to try to get us to dehumanize Muslims, right? Just like that same thing happened, right? After 9/11, right? There was a lot of demonization of Muslims around the world. And so I think what we can all do, I think in our small capacity, right, as individuals, is to ensure that when we see fake news or we find something suspect, right, to call it out or to do better research, right? And just don't take things as at face value, because we all know this best, right? It's like in the fog of war, right? There's just all this thing coming out from left and right. And I don't think it is a coincidence that our mainstream media is controlled by a handful of people, right? I think that plays into that narrative, right? Even I see that the imbalance in coverage, we saw that, right, with Gaza, right, the genocide in Gaza. You just don't see the death toll that's included from that side, and that's what I fear most, is that Americans will fall for it again this time, just like they did, we were convinced, right, when during the Iraq War, we were doing God's bidding, right, by championing righteousness, right, and punishing the terrorists, right? And I think that was dangerous then, and it's more dangerous now. I mean, you look at the false flag incident happened, right, in Texas, right, where that guy is wearing that property of Allah, right, sweatshirt, goes into a bar during Ramadan. Wait a minute, to a bar during Ramadan? What, right? And wearing such a shirt. I'm glad to see people are catching that and calling it out, right? That it feels like this was organized misinformation, right?
Oh, this is absolutely organized
Yeah.
misinformation. So,
But I'm saying, like, I am hopeful because we're seeing people call out immediately, right? Whereas I think during the Iraq War, I think we didn't have this kind of technology to help us, get answers or the right information to people fast, right? But at the same time, there's also 70 million people who voted for Trump, who believed in all those things, right? I just hope that those people, especially, are going to be more open-minded this time, right? And hopefully be able to decipher between propaganda versus facts.
That's wishful thinking. You can ask only so much for people to feel less white. So,
Yeah.
but you can wish it. So
Exactly. Crazy. But yeah, that's what I feel like we can do, is just to call out misinformation. And I think first and foremost, right, having the compassion, right? And understand that, the Iranian people are going through a very tough time right now. And I'm sure there is probably no way for us to send money there to support charities there without being labeled terrorists.
I think we're probably gonna end up in jail if we.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying. Like, we can't do that, right? So obviously, the next best thing we can do is to ensure that we don't let the propaganda win, right? And the best way to do that is to call it out whenever we see it. It's practical.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
true. Shoot, maybe after we put this podcast thing up, they're against the war. They must be with the enemy.
Exactly.
No, we love America and we're concerned because you're heading our country in a direction that is un-American. They would frame that we are anti-West. It was like, no, on the contrary, we are very much pro-Western values. And what we're seeing is that these Western values are being torn apart. And the prospects for the future, right? If we're talking more egalitarian and more opportunities and more equity among the people, is we're moving away from it because why? This administration has moved away from DEI. So everything they're doing is un-American.
Because it's not serving the interests of the administration, right?
No, it's not serving the interest of some very rich sponsors and donors of the party. So they're serving certain interests that are not the interests of the American people. We're going to keep doing this. This was just our first trial, and we're going to do this. We do
once a week. Let's do it. I think this is fun.
Sounds
Record on
great.
Tuesdays,
and we need to, and we should try to get maybe somebody else to just keep this going.
Yep, I think definitely having at least 1 or 2 guests a month is good, right? Because I think there should be always time for just you and me to reflect on things, right? And then
I think that's right.
We include guests to come in and they can talk about stuff.
I need a lot of reflection, so I need to be reflective.
Exactly.
¿Sabes el English word? Yo no hablo inglés.
Exactly.
Señor.
Oh my God. Well, Spanish was their first language, a foreign language other than Romanian.
No.
All right, cool.
We can stop.
Stop the recording.